Prime Minister, I've been taking phone-ins for Prime Minister since the days of Tony Blair. When we announced yesterday that you were appearing, thousands of people sent in questions. The overwhelming majority, I've never seen anything like it, is when is the general election? I'm not going to ask you that because you're not going to tell me. Candidly, you'd be nuts to give me the date here and now. But let me put this a different way. What are you waiting for to announce the date?
Well, when I got this job, Nick, we'd been through a tough time as a country. Everyone had been through a tough time. We had pandemic, war in Ukraine, impact on energy bills, and there was a lot to get on with. I set out 5 very clear priorities. I'm sure we'll talk about them: to halve inflation, grow the economy, reduce debt, cut waiting lists, and to stop the boats. And on all of those, as I'm sure we'll get into, I'm keen to just make progress and demonstrate to the country that if we stick to our plan, we can deliver the change that they and I want to see. And by doing so, just restore everyone's confidence and hope that there's a brighter future ahead and we can have a renewed sense of pride in the nation. That's what I'm working very hard day and night to achieve.
So to use a colloquialism, you want to go long to allow your measures to kick in. So we're looking at the tail end of 2024.
You said you weren't going to ask me. No, I said right
but
at the beginning.
This year because your colleague Oliver Dowden seemed to indicate you might run through.
I said at the beginning of this year very clearly that my working assumption was that we would have an election in the second half of this year. And beyond the timing of that, I really think it's important to focus on the substance and the choice, as I just mentioned. Okay. There are a lot of things facing the country that we've been working hard on that your callers, I'm sure, are interested in, whether we're helping with the cost of living, tackling the waiting list, stopping the boats, having a more sensible approach to net zero. These are all real things that will make a difference to people. We've got a plan, and actually, as I'm sure we'll get into, it's been tough, but I'm encouraged that the plan is now working and we're starting to deliver the change that I really wanted to.
Prime Minister, put your headphones on because I'm going to deliver the first call to you now. In fact, it'll be global affairs, and we're going to go to Binyamin in Preston, who's going to be asking a question, I think, about the Middle East. Binyamin, you're through to the Prime Minister. Go ahead. Good morning.
Good morning, Prime Minister. Good morning, Prime Minister.
Good morning, Binyamin. How are you?
I'm okay, thanks. Just Eid Mubarak to the listeners out there who are celebrating. Just a quick question, Prime Minister. Why won't you stop selling arms to Israel after they've killed British foreigners helping in Gaza?
This was the horrific, of course, attack on which Israel has accepted responsibility. Senior officers have been dismissed Monday night of last week. Prime Minister.
Well, Binyamin, good morning to you and Eid Mubarak to everybody who's listening as well. It was a shocking tragedy what happened to our veterans when they were doing, selflessly carrying out aid missions into Gaza. And, I've also said repeatedly the situation in Gaza is increasingly intolerable. The humanitarian suffering that people are experiencing isn't right. And Prime Minister Netanyahu needs to do more to alleviate that.
So why are we selling weapons to facilitate
I made that very clear to him. So we have a long-established process, which actually the Foreign Secretary David Cameron was talking about in detail yesterday. And we review these things regularly according to a very clear process. That happens periodically, as it has happened recently, and that's led to no change. And actually, none of our closest allies have currently suspended existing arms licenses either. So we continue to discuss these things with our allies. But what I would say is, and I've said consistently, is that the humanitarian situation is dire. I hope everyone is proud of what we're doing to help alleviate that. We've taken the lead. We've tripled our aid into the region. We're getting aid in by land, sea and air. There's a field hospital that's been set up from a team in Manchester. We've dropped aid by air. I spoke to the Prime Minister just the other week, insisting on more aid crossings being opened. Now, that has happened, actually, following my and other interventions from other leaders. But what we now need to see is the volume of aid getting in increase significantly. And ultimately, look, what I want to see is an immediate humanitarian pause so we can get the hostages out who are still being kept, get more aid in, and use that as a platform to build a more sustainable ceasefire.
Prime Minister, have you commissioned specific fresh legal advice since that airstrike of Monday last week?
As I said, there's a long-standing process. We have one of the strictest export licensing regimes anywhere in the world. Assessments are carried out periodically.
So there has been fresh advice since last Monday.
So assessments are carried out periodically. I don't think you would expect me to get into, as has never happened, a precise legal advice. But what I would say is they are carried out periodically, and we have obligations that we follow, and we have to act. The government has to act in accordance with those assessments, as the Foreign Secretary explained very clearly yesterday.
What would be the set of circumstances that the United Kingdom would suspend sale of arms?
As I said, we've got a strict set of criteria. There's an assessment process that is followed. It's followed periodically. We have an obligation to act in accordance with it. it. And as of now, that assessment hasn't changed.
You'll be aware overnight US President Joe Biden has urged Israelis for a 6 to 8 week ceasefire. I'll quote directly President Biden, "What I'm calling for is for the Israelis to just call for a ceasefire, allow for the next 6-8 weeks total access to all food and medicine going into the country." Do you support that?
Yeah, we've been very aligned on this, and I've said consistently in Parliament and publicly that, as I just said now, what we want to see is an immediate humanitarian pause so that we can get the hostages out. And it's critical to remember that Hamas is still holding hostages, including Brits. We want to get the hostages released unconditionally. We want to get aid in to help alleviate the suffering, and then use that as a platform to build a sustainable ceasefire. As I said, I've spoken to regional leaders about that. I've continued to make sure that we support diplomatic efforts to bring that about.
And finally, President Biden goes further. I think what Prime Minister Netanyahu, what he's doing is a mistake. I don't agree with his approach. Do you concur?
I mean, I was very clear with Prime Minister Netanyahu that we were shocked and appalled by what happened, particularly to the Brits who were helping bring aid into Gaza recently. And even before that, been very clear that there is not enough aid going in, and that's not right. And we're very, very concerned about that. The humanitarian situation is appalling, and we want to see alleviation to people who are going through a very tough time. Now, we're doing our bit, but we need the Israelis to open up more crossings and help facilitate more aid going in. I've been very clear about that.
Lastly, on this, last week a number of civil service staff requested that they might be able to stop working if they were working on the sale of Israeli arms because they feared they could be ultimately committing some form of war crime. What's your message to them?
That's not something I'm familiar with. I don't think that would be appropriate. We have a civil service code. All civil servants, should work to the civil service code. As I said, we've got a set of legal processes that govern our export license. We follow those, and the government acts in accordance with them. And once we've made that decision, everyone should just do what they're focused on doing.
Prime Minister, thank you. Let's go to the next call. Louise is in the Rhondda Valley, and you're through to the Prime Minister. Go ahead, Louise. Morning to you.
Good morning, Nick. Good morning, Prime Minister.
Hi, Rhondda.
Sorry, Louise in the Rhondda Valley.
Louise, hi. Sorry, Louise.
Louise in the Rhondda Valley.
Louise, hi.
That's okay. I've been struggling while waiting for psychotherapy for the last 4 years. And as a result, I've had to stop working full-time and am now claiming benefits. I want to know what you'll do to ensure NHS trusts are adhering to your target.
Louise, I'm so sorry to hear about that. And I hope you are getting the support and the treatment you need. And one thing that I think we've done a better job over the last few years, before I became Prime Minister, was making sure that the NHS prioritised mental health in a way that it hadn't in the past. And a few years ago, there was a target set out for how much we would invest in mental health. And actually, I'm pleased to say we've exceeded that target in the last year of NHS funding. And where is that going? Well, that's going in lots of treatments that hopefully you're receiving, but also tackling mental health in lots of different other areas as well, making sure we increase provision in our schools for young people, increase mental health ambulances, crisis centres. So across a range of different interventions, we're doing more than we've ever done, because I think it's important that those who are struggling with mental health get the treatment and care that they need.
When you sat down, Prime Minister, you referenced your 5 pledges from last year, one of which was to cut the waiting lists in the NHS. You'll be aware, of course, that the number of people waiting for appointments has grown from 7.2 when you said that, and you have accepted that's a failure, isn't it?
Yeah, so look, of all the areas that I set out, when it comes to the NHS, that's the place where we've not made as much progress as I would have liked.
Well, respectfully, you've made no progress.
The waiting list today is higher than it was when I took office. Now, if you look at what happened, I think we discussed this when I was last here. Obviously, it was impacted by the strikes, and we were actually seeing progress before then. But what I'm heartened by, and this actually goes to what I was saying right at the beginning, that our plans are now starting to work and deliver the change that people want to see. We've seen the waiting list fall for 4 months in a row now, Nick.
Okay.
Actually, right. So, look, by all means, we've got lots to do. I'm not for any 1 second saying that we don't. We have a lot to do. But the waiting lists have now fallen for 4 months in a row. We haven't been suffering as much industrial action over that time.
What's
so that
your
gives
message
me
to junior doctors?
Well,
Prime
I say,
Minister?
look, we've just now reached a settlement with the consultants,
Indeed.
which is very positive. So now it's just the junior doctors who are the ones that are remaining out on strike. I'd say come back round the table. We've resolved this with everybody else, and we've put very fair offers on the table. Okay. The offer for the junior doctors is the most generous for anyone in the public sector anywhere, and I would urge them to do it, because I think what we all want to see is a waiting list come down so Louise and others can get the treatment they need. As I said, the plan is working. The last 4 months show that the numbers are all now starting to come down, and if we stick with it, I can make sure that we get everyone the help that they need.
Louise, just lastly, how long have you been waiting, Louise?
I've been waiting since January 2020. I finally got a diagnosis from a psychiatrist in February this year, and I've been told I've got to wait another 6 to 12 months for actual psychotherapy. So I'm not seeing any real benefit of any of that. And I'm still struggling daily.
This will be somewhere in the order of about 5 to 5.5 years, then, ultimately, that you might get the treatment, if I've got my sums right.
It could be, yeah.
Okay.
It's just which NHS did you...
Which
use,
NHS
Louise?
Trust is this, Louise?
I can't say it's in Welsh, but it's
right.
Contact.
Well, actually,
you can't say it in. It's
well,
Welsh.
I think that's an interesting point, actually, Louise, because it's the Labour Party who run the NHS in Wales, as you know, because devolved government in Wales, and I think actually there's a very clear contrast to what's happening between England and Wales. Like across the UK, all NHSs have experienced backlogs from COVID. But actually, if you look at what's happening in Wales right now, in contrast to the NHS in England, which we're responsible for, average wait times in Wales are longer. The longest waits is actually what you're talking about. We've virtually eliminated people waiting 2 years and made enormous progress on 1.5-year waiters in England. There are still thousands and thousands of people in Wales who are waiting the longest amount of time. In fact, there are 1 in 5 people sitting on a waiting list in Wales, and A&E performance in Wales is the worst in Britain. Now, that is the reality. It's interesting that Louise has called from Wales.
Indeed.
That is the reality of Labour in power, right? Now, I'm not saying there aren't challenges with the NHS. Of course there are, and we're working on them. But the contrast in how Labour's running the NHS in Wales will demonstrate to you that our plan in England is actually working and making a difference, and you're not seeing that in Wales, and people like Louise are paying the price.
Louise, I wish you well. Do stay in touch. I'm sorry it's taking so long. Next time we talk about these issues, I really want to hear from you again. Be well. Louise, thank you. We stay in Cardiff, Prime Minister, for the next caller. Sarah's in Cardiff. You're through to Rishi Sunak. Go ahead, Sarah. Good morning.
Good morning, Prime Minister. You've spoken about being tough on criminals this morning, yet William Wragg, who put his colleagues and the country's security at risk, has to sack himself. Doesn't that show a complete lack and failure of leadership by yourself?
No, well, Sarah, actually, you know that particular incident is being looked at by 2 different police forces at the moment. So there's a limit to what I can say specifically
we can talk about his membership of the Conservative Party.
Yeah, look, there are wider things happening, and he rightly apologised for what happened. And it's a good reminder to everyone, but particularly those in public life, to obviously be careful about unsolicited messages that they get, because there's lots of bad actors, as we're seeing around the world, who are trying to cause damage to our democratic processes. But more generally, Sarah, you talk about crime. You're right. Look, I do think we should be tough on crime, because I want to make sure that this is a country where my kids, your family, can walk around the streets feeling safe. That's important to me.
Well, we're going to talk about that with your new initiative, I know, but if we just finish up on the William Wragg conversation, we won't dwell on this too long, but your colleague Jeremy Hunt said of Mr. Wragg's apology, it was courageous and fulsome. Do you agree?
Yeah, look, what as he's spoken about it very clearly. He's apologised for what happened, taken responsibility
for it. Why didn't you act, Prime Minister?
Well, as I said, there's a police investigation that's happening. It's important that we work through these things in due time. So he's resigned from all his various positions, including from the Conservative Party whip. And the important thing here is we let the police investigations run their course, but also that it's a reminder about the importance, particularly of people in public life, that they take care with unsolicited messages.
And we will move on, but when Labour say this is a sign of weakness, that you didn't, and I know you're going to refer to police action, but that wouldn't have prohibited you from taking your own action. Labour say it's a sign of weakness. You respond how, Prime Minister?
Well, as I said, look, people can judge me if they want to judge me on that. That's fine. I accept that. And as it comes to weakness, I mean, Keir Starmer still hasn't answered any questions properly about what's going on with Angela Rayner. When it comes to me or my affairs, people are very happy to ask lots of questions, including Angela Rayner herself.
He would say, of course, Sir Keir would say, come on, Prime Minister, that dates back more than 10 years to a woman in a previous relationship, but there's nothing to see here, Prime Minister.
Well, hang on. This is someone who, as far as you believe the media, assumes he's going to stroll into 10 Downing Street later this year, and this is the person who'd be Deputy Leader, Deputy Prime Minister of the country. And I think there are very clear questions for her to answer about this. He hasn't answered them. She hasn't answered them. I think it's reasonable that people get a straight answer on it.
Let's get a straight answer to another question. Jerry's in... thank you for your call, Sarah, by the way. Jerry's in Whitley Bay. You're through to the Prime Minister. Go ahead, Jerry. Good morning.
Morning, Nick. Morning, PM.
Hi, Jerry.
I've been a Conservative voter since 1979, and I've now switched to Reform. what are you going to put in your manifesto to win me back?
Can I ask one question? Sorry to be rude, Prime Minister. Why, in a sentence, why have you swapped to reform, Jerry?
Two issues, net zero and immigration. Particularly immigration, you've been basically saying that we're going to have 250,000 limit back in the 2019 manifesto. You feigned surprise when it hit 745,000, when you must have known how many visas you were issuing.
OK, let's get to the Prime Minister now. A potential lost Conservative voter. Prime Minister.
Well, Jerry, look, first of all, thanks for your support for the party over so many years. That's fantastic. And look, I'm sorry to hear about it, but all I'd say is next election, there's going to be one of two people Prime Minister at the end of it, me or Keir Starmer. On the two issues that you mentioned, you should just come to a view on who you think's more likely to deliver for you. And on the issue of net zero, I don't know if you remember, last year I stood up and made a very significant speech, changed our approach to net zero, was very clear that we can't rush to it in an ideological way that saddles costs of 5, 10, 15 grand on ordinary families like yours. Didn't think that was right. Changed the policy on it. Of course, we're going to get there. I've got young kids. I care about the environment, but we should do that in a sensible way, especially when we're doing a better job on it than pretty much anyone else. I got an enormous amount of flack from people for that, but I think it's the right thing for the country. So I think you and I are aligned on that. And when it comes to immigration, well, I agree with you. Look, the numbers are too high. I've been Prime Minister 18 months. I inherited a set of numbers which were, as you said, extremely high. But I've taken more action on this issue than anyone else. The measures we've taken to raise the salary threshold, clamp down on abuse of the student route and the social care route will mean that inflation is roughly halved. Net migration. The measures all kicked in at the start of this year. Net migration.
I think you said inflation, migration.
Sorry.
Just,
inflation's already been halved.
Okay,
so net migration, so down by 300,000, give or take, the measures that we've introduced, which all kicked in at the beginning of this year, because I agree with you. And when it comes to tackling illegal migration, I'm battling the Labour Party and everyone else to get our Rwanda bill through Parliament. So look, those are the issues that you care about. I care about them too. I've already showed that I'm delivering on them. And as I said, if you vote for reform, all you're going to do is put Keir Starmer in power, and then we're going to get no action on those things that you care about. Migration is not going to come down. The boats will not be stopped, and he will adopt an ideological approach to net zero, reverse the changes I've made, and that's going to cost you and everyone else. And you don't need to even believe me. Just look at what Sadiq Khan's trying to do in London with ULEZ should give you all the evidence that you need.
Having promised that you would stop the boats, you'll be aware that in the first quarter of this year, Prime Minister, we actually have a record figure of 5,435. This, along with your attempt to get waiting lists down, is another failure.
Well, hang on. Last year, first year that I was in power, for the first time ever, across the entire year, we reduced the number of boats coming by over a third, right? Yeah, and they, of course.
But now we're on target for possibly a record year, 5,435 for the first quarter, which is higher than the previous record of 4,548.
And this is all coming from 12 months where we managed to get the numbers down by a third, right? So it shows that progress is possible, but it shows that we can't be complacent. But that's why Rwanda is important. I've always been clear, there's a range of things we need to do, and last year we saw good progress. But ultimately, I believe very clearly, if you come to this country illegally, you shouldn't be able to stay. We must be able to remove you to a safe country or your own, if that is possible. And that's why we need Rwanda, and that's how you have a deterrent. It's once you have that deterrent up and running that people will stop coming. And look, we're trying to get this bill through Parliament as fast as we can. Everyone else is trying to block us, but when we pass the bill, and then we'll be able to get flights going, and then we will see these numbers come down. That's what I'm determined to do, because it's a basic matter of fairness. It's simply not right that people come here illegally.
Will you make the possibility of leaving the ECHR part of the next Conservative manifesto?
Look, I'm not going to get into the manifesto, but I can be very clear, and I have been repeatedly. Look, I am determined to see this policy through because I think it's really important for the country, for the security of our borders, for fairness.
The manifesto.
No, but I'm not going to get into the manifesto right now. But hang on this, I've been very clear. I won't let a foreign court block our ability to put people on planes and send them to Rwanda. We are a reasonable people trying to do a reasonable thing. I've come at this very reasonably. We've worked hard. We've got the numbers down. We've done everything right. We've passed new laws through Parliament. We've addressed everyone's concerns. But at this point, enough is enough. And we've said at this point, we want to pass the bill, get people on planes and get them to Rwanda.
Finally,
and we won't let a foreign court stand in our way.
Finally on this, your former senior colleague, Suella Braverman, was in that very seat yesterday, and she said simply, she doesn't believe you. Based on conversations she's had with you when she was trying to put through tougher policies, she doesn't believe you're going to bring this about. What was your response?
I mean,
to
this
your
is
former
the
colleague?
toughest piece of immigration legislation that anyone's ever seen. And we've got a very specific clause in the bill that makes it clear that it's for ministers to decide whether to comply with these temporary rulings from the ECHR at the European Court. And I wouldn't have put that clause in the bill if I wasn't prepared to use it.
Let's go to other calls. Jerry, thank you. John in Birmingham. John, you're on the radio. Your question to the Prime Minister. Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. Great show, sir. Mr. Prime Minister, your pledge this morning about protecting shop workers, fantastic move, but when are we actually going to get realistic about dealing with the problems and what they are? My local corner shop now has to employ private security. It is getting attacked on a weekly basis. Now, surely we should be investing in the police to deal with these problems at source, not by putting these other elements in place for those situations.
This is something that the Prime Minister, I think, has moved on today, and you're going to hear more. John, stay on the line. Prime Minister.
John, thanks for the call. And you talked about your local corner shop. I grew up working in my mum's shop. She was a pharmacist in Southampton. That's where I spent my time working. And I remember what it's like when things like this happen. It's awful.
People I hate the word shoplift. Did people thieve from your mum's shop?
Yeah, look, it's happened. It happened when we were there, right? And it's an awful thing.
Did you chase them down the street?
No, not quite.
Did your father or your mother?
No, neither those things too. But it
affects the till, doesn't it?
Of course, and as a small family business, it's financially affecting, but it's also very distressing. So look, I know what it feels like, and actually we've got a really good track record on reducing crime since 2010. Since the start of this Parliament, overall crime is down considerably. But the one area we've seen an increase, particularly over the last year, and you talked about it, people will see it on social media, is on retail crime, shoplifting. And it's not acceptable. It's absolutely not right, which is why today, John, we've outlined a series of new steps we're going to take. There's going to be a new offence for assaulting a shop worker, because that's just simply not right. One of my colleagues in Parliament, Matt Vickers, campaigned long and hard on this. I'm delighted we could do that. We're going to make better use of facial recognition technology, and we're also going to make sure that we tag prolific offenders so we can monitor what they're up to and ban them from certain places. And we've been working with the retailers on this for a while. I think it will make a significant difference. But you're right about just extra resources. That's why we've delivered on our manifesto pledge to put 20,000 more police officers on the street, fundamentally, and give them the powers they need to keep us safe. And this retail crime plan is just the latest in the different plans we've been rolling out that have been working. Overall crime is down, as I said, by about 50% since 2010 and down by about a fifth since the start of this Parliament.
If we stay with shop theft, you write that anyone who assaults a retail worker will face up to 6 months in jail. But my understanding is that the sentencing bill, which is waiting to go through, is going to scrap all sentences under 12 months. So how will that work?
No, there are definitely situations where it would be better, and in fact will cut crime, to treat people with, for example, tags in the community. But that will be a choice at the time, wherever is better for the situation that we're dealing in. We'll have 6 month jail terms after the sentence.
Yeah, I mean,
this new offence,
right.
This new offence specifically allows for that, because we have seen an increase in assaults on shop workers. I don't think that's right. And as I said, there's been a campaign led by one of my colleagues, Matt Vickers, to have a specific offence to demonstrate the seriousness with which we take this issue, but also to make sure that we send a strong signal.
Yes,
and
our jails are full, Prime Minister.
Oh, well, actually, we're embarking right now on the largest expansion of prison places that we've seen in literally, if not century, decades and decades. And as a programme that I authorised as Chancellor, multi-billion pounds, building thousands and thousands more prison places. And what we've seen is the average sentence.
Don't build one overnight, sir.
No, that programme started 2 or 3 years ago when I was Chancellor, and we're in the midst of it. But sentencing overall has increased over the last few years, and we've, for example, ended the automatic halfway release point that we saw for some sexual violent crimes. Sentencing overall has been increasing, because I think it's right that we're tough on criminals, and that's why we're building the prison places to accommodate them.
Just lastly on this, you say that these people who thieve from shops will be banned from the shop because they will be face recognition. Do you expect security staff to turn some of these people away? What's your message to them? And indeed, we know now that many stores tell their security staff, if someone runs off with £50 worth of whiskey or lamb chops, don't chase after them. What are you saying to them?
So we've been working really closely with retailers, and actually I'll be visiting some later today, who have helped develop this plan together, as I said, with the policing minister, Chris Philp, who's done a superb job. He was just seeing retailers in Downing Street last week, a very positive meeting about the cooperation we've been having, where you can use facial recognition, the police national database, together with shop CCTV.
But what's your message to
catch
security
people.
staff?
Well,
Actually,
that we've got your back.
What does that mean?
Back. And that's why we've introduced a new crime of assaulting retail workers, shop workers, because it's not right. They should be able to go about their day-to-day lives without fear of being assaulted by people. That's why we're introducing a brand new offence to target people who do that. And we're working closely with them to make sure that prolific offenders actually are not able to come into their shops in the first place with the use of tags and things like that.
Last couple of minutes together, I was at a charity event about 6 or 7 weeks ago where you made a very powerful speech about how you wanted the police to be more proactive on the policing of demonstrations, particularly in protection of Jewish people. Since there's been a rather ugly incident in Scotland, and here in London, a police officer told a Jewish woman that a swastika needed to be taken into context. Do you think the police have heeded your call?
You know, I spoke about this a little while ago on the steps of Downing Street, because what was going on was just not right. And it wasn't British, actually. I think we've got such a proud tradition of respect and tolerance. And yes, people can make their views heard, but that can't cross the line into intimidating people and
so have the
acting
police
in a
done
violent
enough, Prime
manner.
Minister?
Look, well, I'm clear that I hold them to account for keeping our streets safe and for making sure that nobody, whoever they are, suffers from intimidating or racist behaviour on our streets. We're giving them more powers when needed. So we're going to, as we've announced, banning flares, looking at face masks, climbing on war memorials, all these things that we've given them more powers to do. But I expect them to use them, and no one should have to experience, as I said, racist or forms of hatred on our streets.
Can a swastika ever be taken into context?
Yeah, no. I mean, again, I have to be careful because I shouldn't comment on individual police matters. That's not the job of politicians, and I think people would understand that. But look, obviously there's lots of things that we've been seeing on our screens that are not right. I expect the police to follow up on all of these things and make sure that those who are behaving in a way which is not in accordance with our values, undermines as the things that we all hold dear, and is acting in a way that is intimidating or racist, are dealt with swiftly and promptly.
I'm told we have time for one more. Steve's in Blackpool. Steve, you're through to the Prime Minister. Go ahead. Morning, Steve.
Morning, Nick. Morning, Prime Minister.
Hi, Steve.
I'm a veteran. I joined the Army in 1988. Defence spending at the time was just over 4%, 4.2% of GDP. I left in 2013. The defence spending was just over 2%, so half. Bearing in mind that our minimum we can spend, because our NATO commitment is 2%, and you've got Russia, you've got the Middle East, and you've got the tensions with Taiwan and China, do you not think now is the time for us to spend more than the minimum on defence?
Thank you for your service, Steve, Prime Minister.
Steve, great question to end on. Thank you. I joined Nick, so thanks very much for your service. And you're right. Look, the world is sadly a less certain and a less safe place, and it's important that we invest to keep the country safe. That's what we've been doing. And you talked about 79, 80, that we've seen the largest increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War. I authorised that as Chancellor.
Grant Shapps says it's not enough, sir.
£24 billion, and that's why it's increasing since then.
But Grant Shapps says we need to get to 3%. You're currently at 2.2.
Actually, we're at 2.3%. And the important thing to bear in mind is, behind the US, we are and have consistently over the last decade been the second largest spender on defence in NATO. And Steve, you're absolutely right about the importance of the NATO alliance to our safety. And there are dozens of other members of NATO who are not even spending the 2%. Now, we have shown British leadership on this. Our job is always to set a lead, and that's what we have done. But it is
when
also
will it
important.
Get to 2.5, Prime Minister?
We've said that we'll set out a plan to do that when the circumstances are right. But the key is right now we are investing more in defence. And I think, as I said, it's at the highest level it's been at for years and years. Allies around the world want to work with us, whether that's Australia and America building a new generation of submarines, which I announced when I got this job, the new generation of fighter aircraft with Italy and Japan. We are leading in NATO around the world. We will always invest to keep our country safe. And the last thing I'd just say as well is something that's important to me personally is making sure that ours is the best country in the world to be a veteran. Steve and his colleagues did an enormous amount for our country. What we want to make sure is that this is the best place place in the world for them once they finish their service life. And I'll be talking a little bit about that later on as well. But Steve, thank you to you and your colleagues for what you've done for us, and want to make sure we're delivering for you too after you've left the services.
Before I let you go, and particularly pertinent as I understand you have two daughters who are approaching their teens, this CAS report, of which I'm sure you're aware, thousands of vulnerable children questioning their gender identity have been let down by the NHS providing unproven treatment. Puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, masculising, feminising people's appearance, despite remarkably weak evidence. A lot of those words are from Dr. Hilary Cass. Your response to what's being hailed as a shattering report.
Yeah, well, you're right. I have two young daughters who I care particularly about.
Do they ever discuss trans issues, or is it a bit young?
Look, I try, so try and keep them out of my political life. But look, I think like everyone in what Cass's report rightly does is shine a spotlight on the fact that we need to exercise extreme caution when it comes to these issues. Like, we care above all about the well-being of children, and it's clear that these things are not neutral acts, whether that's social transitioning, any kind of medical intervention. We simply do not know the long-term effects of these things, and that's why anyone involved in considering these issues, of course, have to treat people with sensitivity and compassion, but also have to be extremely cautious when it comes to taking any action.
Do you agree
we just do not know the impact, and that's why I'm glad that we commissioned the report, and I, as Prime Minister, have been very clear and consistent on this issue, and I've taken the same stance throughout. The report is very supportive, I think, of the direction of travel we've taken, particularly in our schools where we've issued guidance recently so that teachers know how to deal with these things. Again, talking to parents, recognising...
But do you underscore the findings of the report? That's what I'm driving.
I said it's hundreds and hundreds of pages. I haven't read every page. But I think it is broadly in agreement with the direction of travel that the government is taking on this, which is to exercise extreme caution on these issues. We do not know the long-term impacts of these things, and that's why it's not right that kids are subjected to various different things. And that's why I said the NHS has taken steps to ban puberty blockers. We've issued guidance in schools to make it very clear that we should act cautiously with regard to these questions, whilst of course treating everyone with sensitivity and compassion. That's the right approach, and as I said, I think the report, without having read every single paragraph of it, is, I think, in alignment with those with that approach.
OK, finally, and we've discussed many things, and on a lighter moment, Prime Minister, you stand accused of destroying a fashion icon, the so-called Adidas Samba shoe, which you were wearing recently. Apparently what Jeremy Clarkson managed to do for blue jeans, and Samantha Cameron, Lady Cameron, did to tattoos, you've done to this particular shoe, where because people like you should not be wearing them because they're hip. Did you choose them, Prime Minister?
Yes. Well, first of all, I just issue a fulsome apology to the Samba community. But in my defence, I would say I have been wearing Adidas trainers, including Sambas, and others, in fact, for many, many years. Actually, the first pair my brother got for me many, many years ago. My first pair of fun Adidas trainers as a Christmas present, and I haven't looked back since. So I've been a long-time devotee.
So you did buy this pair, did you?
That pair I did buy, yes. But I said I've had Adidas trainers for a very, very long time. But I said I offer a fulsome apology to the Samba community, and as ever remain kind of intrigued
as to what they've hit on next,
and amused by the amount of focus on what I'm wearing.
I haven't spoken about your length of trousers, so we move on. I'm grateful to you.
I guess that's progress.
Yes,